Let me start by saying this didn't happen years ago, or to some distant relative. It happened to me just last winter, and even now, I can't park my car without scanning every shadow. I live in a mid-sized city where public parking garages are common. The kind with low ceilings, dim lights, and too many blind corners. I worked late hours at the time and often parked in the same garage downtown. It was always nearly empty when I returned at night, and though I sometimes felt uneasy, nothing had ever happened until that night. It was just after 11 p.m. when I left the office. The streets were quiet, and snow had begun to fall, muffling every sound. I crossed into the garage and heard the echo of my own footsteps bouncing off the concrete walls. That echo was something I was used to, but that night there was another sound, a second pair of footsteps. They weren't in sync with mine. They fell just a beat behind, deliberate and heavy. I froze and glanced over my shoulder. The garage level was empty. Rows of cars sat lifeless in the shadows, their windows dusted with frost. No one was there. I convinced myself it was just the acoustic. Sound carried strangely in places like that. I forced myself to keep walking, my keys tight in my hand. The footsteps returned. This time, closer. I picked up my pace. So did they. When I reached the corner leading to the row where my car was parked, I finally saw him. A man stood about 30 feet back, half in shadow. He was tall, wearing a hooded jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. What chilled me wasn't his presence. It was the way he didn't try to hide. He just stood there, arms at his sides, watching me. I muttered something under my breath, something like, "Can I help you?" My voice echoed unnaturally. He didn't answer. I turned down the row, fumbling to unlock my car. That's when I heard it. The sound of running. He was sprinting. Full speed. My instincts took over. I yanked open the driver's door, slammed it shut, and locked it in one motion. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear, but the sound of his footsteps grew louder until they stopped right beside my car. I didn't look at him directly, just caught the outline in my peripheral vision. He was bent down, staring into my window. And he was smiling. Not the kind of smile you give a stranger to seem friendly, but a wide, unblinking grin that pressed his face against the glass. I fumbled to start the engine. The key jammed twice before it caught. When the engine roared to life, his smile widened. He tapped lightly on the window like he was testing the glass. Then he whispered something. I couldn't hear it, not clearly. Just the muffled vibration of words against the glass. I slammed the car into reverse, tires screeching as I backed out crookedly. He didn't flinch, didn't move, just stood in the same spot watching me leave. I tore out of that garage, running every stop sign until I was on the main road. My hands shook so badly I could barely steer. I didn't call the police that night. I didn't know what to say. He hadn't touched me, hadn't broken into my car. What would they do? But the next morning, I decided to check the garage security office. I told the attendant what had happened. She pulled up the footage from that level, and we watched together. My stomach dropped. There I was, walking quickly down the row, fumbling with my keys. But the man wasn't on the footage. Not at all. Not when I first saw him. Not when he sprinted toward me. Not even when he pressed his face against the glass. It was just me, alone, panicking in an empty garage. The attendant gave me a look I can't forget, part pity, part concern. I left before she could say anything. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And the memory of that smile has haunted me every time I step into a parking garage since. Two summers ago, I agreed to house sit for a family friend. I thought it would be an easy way to earn some extra money, maybe even a quiet little vacation for myself. But what I experienced in that house still makes my skin crawl. The house belonged to a couple in their late 60s. They were leaving for a 3-week trip and just wanted someone to water the plants, collect the mail, and keep the place from looking abandoned. The property was on the edge of town, tucked into a wooded area where the streetlights barely reached. At first, I was excited. The house was large, full of antiques, and sat on a wide lot with no close neighbors. During the day, the place was beautiful, sunlight streaming through tall windows, the forest just beyond the backyard. But when night came, it felt like a different house entirely. By the second evening, I noticed the noises. At around 11 p.m., I was reading on the couch when I heard footsteps upstairs. Heavy ones, like a man pacing back and forth. My heart stopped. I was supposed to be alone. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, and called the homeowners. I tried to sound casual, asking if anyone else had keys to the house. They said no. Absolutely not. The only set was the one they'd given me. I didn't tell them what I heard. I didn't want to alarm them. That night, I locked myself in the guest bedroom downstairs. The sound of footsteps continued on and off for hours. They weren't faint either. It was like someone was deliberately dragging their feet across the floor above me. The next morning, I convinced myself it was the house settling. Old houses made noises. That's what people always said. The following night proved me wrong. I was lying in bed, trying to sleep, when I heard the creak of the stairs. Slow, deliberate creaks, one after another, like someone was making their way down toward me. I froze. My phone was on the nightstand, but I was too afraid to move. The creaks stopped halfway down the staircase. Then silence. I stayed like that for hours, staring at the door, waiting for it to open. It never did. When the sun finally rose, I packed a bag and decided I couldn't stay another night. But before leaving, I felt guilty. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it really was the old wood expanding and contracting in the summer heat. That afternoon, I convinced myself to stay. That decision is one I'll always regret. The third night was the worst. I had just finished locking up for the evening when I heard something I'll never forget. A voice. It was faint at first, echoing from somewhere upstairs. A low murmur, almost like a chant. Then, clear as day, a man's voice said, "Why did you come here?" My blood ran cold. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I backed slowly toward the front door, fumbling for my keys. Then, from upstairs, I heard a loud crash, like a piece of furniture being thrown to the floor. That was enough. I ran outside, didn't even lock the door, and sat in my car shaking. I stayed there until dawn, headlights on, watching the dark silhouette of the house. The next morning, I called the homeowners and told them everything. I expected them to laugh, to brush it off. Instead, there was a long silence. Finally, the husband said, "That's why we don't stay there anymore." He explained that the house had belonged to his father, who died in the upstairs master bedroom. In the years since, every guest they'd had stay overnight reported footsteps, voices, or worse. He admitted that even he refused to go upstairs after dark. I asked why they didn't tell me before. His wife's voice came on the line, trembling. "Because most people don't last more than one night. We thought maybe you'd be different." I left that afternoon and never returned. Even now, when I pass that wooded road, I feel the urge to drive faster, to avoid even looking at the house. Because sometimes I wonder, if that was just a haunting, why did it feel like whoever, or whatever, was up there knew I didn't belong? Why did it sound like he was waiting for me? This happened when I was 19, driving home late one night after visiting a friend. The trip should have been uneventful, just an hour on quiet country roads. But what I encountered on that drive still keeps me awake at night. It was close to midnight when I turned onto a two-lane road that cut through miles of farmland. No houses, no streetlights, just my headlights carving through the dark. The only sound was my tires humming against the asphalt. About 15 minutes in, I noticed movement in the distance. At first, I thought it was an animal, but as I got closer, I realized it was a man. He was standing on the shoulder of the road, completely still. He wore a hooded sweatshirt with the hood pulled low, his face hidden in shadow. I slowed down instinctively, wondering if he needed help, but something about him felt wrong. He didn't wave. He didn't step forward. He just stood there, his head tilted slightly toward my car as I passed. My stomach dropped. A mile later, I checked my rearview mirror, expecting to see nothing. But he was still there, except this time, he was in the middle of the road, directly under the fading beam of my taillights. That image is burned into my mind. A lone figure watching me drive away. I pressed harder on the gas. Another 10 minutes passed, and I finally began to calm down. I told myself it was just some drifter, maybe someone walking to the next town. But then my headlights caught something up ahead. It was him. The same man. Standing by the side of the road again. My chest tightened. There was no way he could have gotten there before me. Not on foot. Not without a car. Yet there he was, in the exact same posture, head angled toward me as I approached. This time, I didn't slow down. I kept my eyes forward and sped past, heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. A few miles later, I forced myself to look in the rearview mirror. Empty road. No one there. For a moment, relief washed over me. Until my headlights flickered. Just once, like the power had briefly cut out. When they came back on, I saw something that made me scream. The man was standing on the side of the road again. Only this time, he was closer to the edge, as if waiting to step into my lane. I swerved to the far side and flew past him, tears stinging my eyes. My entire body was shaking, but I didn't dare stop. The road stretched on endlessly, black fields on either side. My phone had no signal. All I could do was drive. And then, for the last time, I saw him. He was in the middle of the road, directly ahead. His hood was still low, but I could make out his mouth, curved into a faint smile. I slammed on the brakes, tires screeching, the car swerving wildly as I tried not to hit him. At the last second, he stepped aside, moving with a slow, deliberate calm, as though he'd been waiting for that exact moment. When my car finally stopped, he was gone. Just gone. No footstep, no trace. I sat there shaking, headlights cutting across the empty road. My instincts screamed at me not to get out, not to look for him. So I didn't. I drove the rest of the way home with my eyes glued forward, praying I wouldn't see him again. I never did. The next day, I told my parents, my friends, anyone who would listen. Most of them laughed, said it was probably just some traveler or a trick of the mind after a long night. But I know what I saw. That man wasn't normal. He couldn't have been. Because unless there's another explanation, he was waiting for me in places no human could have reached in time. And the way he looked at me, with that faint smile, it didn't feel random. It felt like a warning.